He thought the hill was empty, just snow, wind, and an abandoned house no one talked about anymore. Then he heard it. Not a bark, not a cry, just a breath that sounded like it was running out of time. A full-grown German shepherd trapped inside a tree, starving, frozen, and so weak it didn't even try to fight back. Everyone else would have called it an accident. The Navy SEAL knew better. This dog hadn't been forgotten. It had been silenced. As he pulled the dog free, the hill revealed scars, cables, cut trees, and a secret someone would kill to keep buried. No gunfire followed, no hero speeches. Just patience, evidence, and a truth that couldn't stay hidden anymore. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe for more true stories of compassion and courage. In the northern reaches of the United States, where winter lingered longer than memory and morning light arrived so clear it felt almost accusatory, Reed Calloway lived alone in a weathered log cabin at the foot of a mountain. The land there had a way of telling the truth whether one asked for it or not. Snow reflected light without embellishment. Trees stood bare and honest. Nothing hid for long. Reed was 40 years old. He stood a little over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, his build lean and disciplined rather than bulky. What came from years of training followed by years of deliberate maintenance. His face was sharply angled, clean-shaven, with a strong jaw and cheekbones that caught the light when he turned his head. His hair was dark brown, kept in a neat undercut, always trimmed as if some part of him still believed inspections could happen at any moment. His eyes were blue-gray, steady and deep, the kind that seemed to look past what people said and linger instead on what they avoided. When Reed spoke, which he did sparingly, his voice was calm and level, without unnecessary warmth or aggression. He listened more than he talked. He always had. There was no family photograph on the cabin walls, no framed memories, no pets, no voices that called his name when the door opened. Reed had arranged his life that way deliberately, though he rarely admitted it even to himself. Solitude, he had learned, was easier than explaining absences. His days followed a narrow, repetitive geometry. He woke before sunrise, boiled coffee strong enough to sting the nose, and ran along the frozen trail that cut through the pines behind the cabin. He repaired old furniture scavenged from barns and auctions, worked the grain of wood until it submitted, ate simply, slept lightly. At night, the silence grew so complete that even the wind sounded like it was asking something of him, something Reed had not yet decided how to answer. Behind the cabin rose a hill, steep and bald near the top, crowned by an abandoned house that had not been lived in for years. No lights ever came from its windows. No smoke rose from its chimney. The structure leaned slightly, as if tired of standing but unwilling to fall. Reed knew it was there, of course. He could see it from his porch when the air was clear. But he had never gone up to it. Not out of fear. Reed was not afraid of empty buildings, but because experience had taught him something simple and unforgiving. Not all silence meant safety. He had learned that lesson far from this place, in heat and dust and chaos, in landscapes where the quiet before dawn could turn violent without warning. War did that. It trained a person to read absence as carefully as presence, to respect stillness without trusting it. When Reed left the Navy SEALs, he brought those instincts with him like invisible scars. They healed over, but they never disappeared. The morning Reed altered his route was not marked by any obvious sign. The sky was pale and cloudless, the temperature biting but manageable. His boots crunched rhythmically against packed snow as he ran, breath controlled, heart steady. About halfway through his usual loop he slowed, not because he was tired, but because something in him suggested deviation. A small thing. A nudge. Reed did not believe in omens or voices, but he believed in paying attention. He turned toward the slope of the hill. The climb was gradual at first, then sharper. His breath deepened, his muscles warmed. He noticed details others might overlook: the faint impression of old tire tracks half buried beneath snow, the snapped ends of branches that looked too clean to be natural. He registered these things without assigning meaning, the way a man trained to survive cataloged information as habit. Then he heard it. At first, Reed thought it was the wind threading itself through the hollow of the trees. But the sound came again, irregular, strained. Not wind, not animal chatter. It was breathing. Labored, shallow, breaking between pauses, as if whatever produced it was running out of strength. Reed stopped moving. The rehook came not as fear, but as recognition. His pulse slowed instead of spiking. His shoulders squared. He knew that sound. He had heard it before in other forms, through fabric masks, through walls, through radio static. The sound of a body fighting to remain present. He moved carefully now, scanning the ground, his senses narrowing. The abandoned house loomed above, closer than he had realized. And near it, something darker than shadow shifted against the base of an old tree. Reed did not yet see the shape clearly. He did not rush. He had learned what rushing cost. He took one step forward, and the sound changed. A faint scrape, a tremor. The breathing stuttered. Whatever was up there was alive. For now. Reed's first instinct was not heroism. It was assessment. Distance. Risk. He was alone. There was no one to call out to, no partner to cover his blind side. He felt the weight of that truth settle into his bones, familiar and cold. Still he moved. As he climbed, the abandoned house revealed more of itself: rotting boards, windows blind with dust, the suggestion of stories left unfinished. Reed felt no curiosity toward it. His focus remained on the sound, on the uneven rhythm that grew weaker with each step. He reached the tree at last. The sight stopped him. Something large was wedged within the hollow of the trunk, its body caught at an angle that made movement impossible. Fur matted and darkened with dirt and old blood, a flank that rose and fell too quickly. The creature's head lolled slightly, eyes half open, unfocused. It was a German shepherd, fully grown, powerfully built even in starvation, its black and tan coat dulled by exhaustion. One front leg hung at an unnatural angle, trembling with the effort of holding any weight at all. The dog did not growl. It did not bark. It barely reacted at all, except for a slow blink and a faint, involuntary whine that escaped its throat like an apology. Reed's chest tightened. He did not move closer yet. He crouched, lowering his profile, hands open and visible. The dog's ears twitched weakly. Its eyes found Reed's and stayed there, not pleading, not aggressive, just fixed, as if whatever strength it had left was devoted to watching him. Reed felt something unfamiliar press against his composure. Not panic, not fear, responsibility. The kind that arrived without permission and refused to leave. He glanced around again, scanning for danger, for owners, for signs of recent human presence. There were none. Only the house, the hill, the tree, and this animal, caught between endurance and collapse. For a long moment Reed remained exactly where he was, breathing steadily, his mind working through options with the precision of old habit. He knew enough to understand what he was looking at was not simple. Extraction would be dangerous. The dog was injured, exhausted, possibly feral with pain. One wrong move could make things worse. He could walk away. No one would know. No one was watching. The thought did not linger. Reed shifted his weight forward just slightly, and the dog's breathing changed again, sharper this time, tinged with fear. Reed stopped. He spoke then, quietly, his voice low and even, the tone he used when things were most uncertain. He did not use commands. He used reassurance. "It's all right," he said, though he did not yet know if that was true. "I see you." The words felt strange in the cold air, as if they had been waiting a long time to be spoken. The dog's eyes fluttered. Its chest rose and fell once more, shallow but steady. The hill stood silent around them. The abandoned house watched without judgment, and somewhere between the man who had chosen isolation and the animal that had been left behind, a line had been crossed, quietly, irrevocably. Reed did not yet know how this would end. He only knew that whatever came next would begin here, at the edge of the map, where solitude met consequence and silence finally answered back. Reed stayed where he was for several seconds after speaking, his body low, his weight balanced on the balls of his feet. Years of training had taught him that the moment after contact was often the most dangerous, not because something happened, but because people assumed nothing would. The dog remained wedged in the hollow of the tree, its broad chest shuddering with shallow breaths, each inhale sounding like it had to negotiate permission from pain. Up close, the animal was larger than Reed had first thought, a full-grown male German shepherd with the heavy frame of a working dog, though starvation had carved sharp lines along its ribs and hips. The black and tan coat was dull, clotted in places with dried mud and darkened streaks that might once have been blood. One front leg, the left, trembled intermittently, the paw barely touching the ground, as if even gravity felt like too much to ask. The dog's head rested at an awkward angle against the inner curve of the trunk. His ears were half raised, not in aggression, but in effort, as though lifting them fully required strength it no longer had. Its eyes, amber, deep, unusually lucid for an animal in this state, tracked Reed with a focus that felt less like fear and more like assessment. It did not bare its teeth. It did not try to pull away. It simply watched, breathing, surviving moment by moment. Reed noticed the rope then. It was not a natural snare of roots or fallen branches. It was industrial, frayed nylon, sun-bleached but still strong, looped tight around the dog's chest and shoulder, the other end buried deep within the hollow. Someone had tied it. Someone had pulled it taut. That detail settled in Reed's mind with quiet way. Wait. Accidents left chaos. This was deliberate restraint. He exhaled slowly, letting the breath leave his body in a way that might signal calm to the animal. "Easy," he said again, not louder than before. His voice was steady, stripped of command, the same tone he used when de-escalating situations that had already gone too far. The dog's breathing hitched, then resumed, marginally slower. Reed took that as permission, not trust, but tolerance. He moved one step closer, careful to keep his hands visible, his movements predictable. The snow beneath his boots crunched softly, and the sound made the dog flinch, muscles spasming against the rope. A faint whine escaped its throat, thin and involuntary, followed by a sharper breath that bordered on panic. Reed stopped instantly. He lowered himself further, one knee touching the cold ground, and waited. Time stretched. The wind brushed the hilltop, rattling the skeletal branches of the abandoned house nearby. Reed became aware of his own breathing again, of the cold seeping through the fabric of his clothes, of the quiet way the world held still around them. He had learned long ago that patience could be a form of mercy. When the dog's trembling eased, Reed reached slowly toward his belt and retrieved a small multi-tool. The metal caught a flash of light, and the dog's eyes flicked to it, wary but not reactive. Reed angled the tool away, making sure the blade remained in clear view before he brought it down, inch by inch, toward the rope. He did not touch the dog yet. He cut only the air, a demonstration rather than an action, as if explaining his intentions in a language neither of them spoke. The first cut did not sever anything. The rope was thicker than it looked, reinforced, meant to bear weight. Reed adjusted his grip and applied more pressure. The blade bit into the nylon, fibers stretching and snapping, with a sound that made the dog jolt. The movement caused pain. Reed saw it immediately in the tightening of the animal's jaw, the flash of white at the corner of its eye. "I know," Reed murmured, the words barely forming in the cold. "I know." He stopped cutting. He placed his free hand against the tree instead, grounding himself, giving the dog time to breathe again. Reed's mind worked through scenarios with ruthless efficiency. If he cut too fast, the sudden release could cause the dog to thrash, tearing muscle or snapping bone. If he cut too slowly, hypothermia and shock would finish what exhaustion had started. And if the dog panicked fully, it could bite, not out of malice, but out of reflex. Reed accepted that risk without resentment. Pain made rules irrelevant. He resumed, this time shaving the rope gradually, weakening it rather than severing it outright. His gloved fingers brushed the dog's fur once, accidentally, and he froze, waiting for a reaction. The dog did not snap. It flinched, then leaned, just slightly, into the contact. As though warmth, even unfamiliar warmth, was something its body remembered wanting. That small movement unsettled Reed more than any threat could have. He felt a tighten abdal behind his sternum, sharp and unexpected, and forced himself to remain present. This was not the time for sentiment. It was the time for control. The rope finally gave enough to slacken. The dog's body shifted, weight redistributing, and for a brief moment Reed thought he had miscalculated. The animal cried out, a hoarse sound torn from deep in its chest, and its injured leg buckled. Reed lunged forward instinctively, bracing the dog's shoulder with his forearm, taking part of its weight without fully removing the pressure. Pain flared in his own arm as claws scraped against his sleeve, not in attack, but in desperate search for leverage. "Easy," Reed said again, more firmly now. "I've got you." The words surprised him as much as the dog. He had not said anything like that in years. It took nearly 40 minutes to free the dog enough to move it. Reed worked methodically, stopping whenever the animal's breathing worsened, adjusting his approach when its muscles spasmed. His hands went numb from the cold. A shallow cut opened along his knuckle where the rope fibers snapped back, stinging briefly before the cold dulled it. He barely noticed. His focus narrowed to the animal in front of him, to the simple equation of pressure and relief, pain and pause. When the dog finally slid free of the hollow, it collapsed immediately, its legs folding beneath it, as if they had forgotten how to function. Reed guided it down, supporting its torso until it lay on its side in the snow. The animal's chest heaved, breath coming in harsh, rattling pulls, but it was no longer trapped. Reed knelt there, one hand resting lightly on the dog's flank, feeling the rise and fall beneath his palm. The fur was coarse, chilled, but undeniably alive. The dog's eyes closed briefly, then opened again, fixing on Reed's face with an intensity that made him look away for a second, unsettled. There was no gratitude in that gaze, no relief in the human sense. There was only presence, awareness. That was when it happened, the re-hook moment that would stay with Reed long after the cold left his bones. As he shifted his weight, preparing to lift the dog, its head turned, slowly but deliberately, toward the abandoned house above them. The movement was not random. The dog's ears angled forward, its breathing momentarily forgotten as its gaze locked onto the structure. A low sound vibrated in its throat, not quite a growl, not quite a whine, something between warning and recognition. Reed followed its line of sight. The house stood silent, windows dark, roof sagging under the weight of neglect. Nothing moved, no doors opened, no figures appeared. And yet Reed felt it too then, a subtle tightening in the air, the sense that this place held more than rot and dust. The dog did not look afraid. It looked certain. The moment passed. The dog's head fell back to the snow, strength spent, the strange sound fading into breath once more. Reed remained still, his mind replaying the movement, the intent behind it. He filed it away without explanation. Some answers arrived later, or not at all. With careful effort, Reed slid his arms beneath the dog's chest and hindquarters. The weight surprised him, solid even in starvation, and the injured leg hung uselessly as he lifted. The dog tensed, then relaxed, allowing itself to be carried. Reed adjusted his grip, setting his jaw against the strain in his shoulders, and began the slow descent down the hill. Each step required attention. One slip could undo everything. The cabin came into view through the trees, smoke from its chimney faint against the pale sky. Reed focused on that sight, on the promise of warmth and shelter, on the simple next action. Behind them the hill stood quiet once more, the abandoned house watching as it always had. Reed did not know how long the dog had been trapped there. He did not know who had tied the rope or why. He only knew that by the time he reached his door, his life, so carefully reduced to one man and his silence, had already begun to change. Reed did not rush. He had learned long ago that rushing was how people turned bad situations into unrecoverable ones. He stayed low, knees bent, weight centered, watching the dog's chest rise and fall in uneven pulls. The animal, an adult male German shepherd, large-framed even in starvation, was caught in a geometry that had no mercy. The hollow of the tree pinched its shoulders, the rope bit into muscle, and the injured front leg trembled as if the nerve itself were arguing with pain. The dog's teeth clicked together once, involuntarily, not a threat, but a reflex. Reed took that sound seriously. Reflexes were the last thing to go. He assessed the scene the way he would a collapsed wall or a breached doorway. Points of pressure, lines of movement. What could shift if released too quickly? The rope was industrial nylon, sun-bleached but strong, looped tight and anchored deep inside the trunk. The dog's breathing worsened whenever Reed moved too close, and Reed adjusted, backing off until the rhythm steadied. He spoke softly, not because words calmed animals, but because cadence did. Calm had a tempo. When Reed reached in to cut the rope again, the dog panicked. The chest heaved, the head jerked, teeth snapped once in the air. Reed took a shallow bite of pain as the dog's skull knocked the wood and his forearm scraped against bark. Blood welled along a knuckle, bright and brief, before the cold dulled it. He did not swear. He did not withdraw. He froze and waited. Waiting was a skill. He changed tactics. Instead of severing, he shaved the rope, thinning it strand by strand, stopping whenever the dog's breath climbed too fast. He packed snow against the animal's neck and shoulder to slow swelling, a crude measure, but better than nothing. The wind shifted. The light began to flatten. Reed noted the angle of the sun and felt a familiar pressure gather behind his eyes. Night on the hill would be lethal. The dog's reactions softened with time. Not trust exactly, but a truce. Its amber eyes stayed on Reed's face, as if measuring him against something remembered. The ears rose and fell with effort. When Reed's gloved hand brushed the dog's flank again, the animal leaned a fraction toward the warmth, and then stilled, embarrassed by the need. Reed felt the urge to say something reassuring rise in his throat and tamped it down. He kept his voice low and neutral. The rope finally slackened enough to redistribute the weight. Reed braced the dog's shoulder with his forearm and eased pressure off the trapped chest. The dog cried out. A hoarse sound dragged up from deep inside and then sagged. Reed took more of the weight, his shoulders burning, boots slipping on packed snow. He shifted again, coaxing the dog's body free inch by inch, careful not to let the injured leg catch. When the dog slid out, it collapsed as if its bones had forgotten how to hold together. Reed guided it down, one knee in the snow, one hand on the rib cage, counting breaths until they slowed from ragged to merely shallow. He checked gums, pale, dehydration. Shock was not far behind. He pulled a thermal blanket from his pack and draped it over the dog, leaving the face exposed, rubbing warmth into the shoulders through the fabric. That was when the first complication arrived. Not a person, not a threat. Time. The dog shivered violently, then went still. Reed felt the flank under his palm and counted again. The breathing resumed, faint but present. He had to move, and moving a 40-kilogram animal down a hill alone was a calculation with few good answers. He slid his arms beneath the chest and hips and lifted. The dog tensed, then allowed itself to be carried, the injured leg hanging loose. Reed's boots cut a careful line through the snow as he descended, stopping whenever the animal's breath fluttered. The cabin came into view, smoke faint against the pale sky, and Reed fixed on it the way one fixed on a waypoint under fire. Focus on the next meter, not the distance left. Inside the cabin, heat wrapped them like a living thing. Reed laid the dog on a mat near the stove, added another blanket, and dripped water along the dog's gums a few milliliters at a time. He set a timer on his watch and waited, counting seconds, monitoring breaths, resisting the urge to do more than was safe. Doing too much was another way to kill someone. The dog stirred, head lifting with effort, eyes scanning the room. The cabin was spare. Wood, iron, tools hung in disciplined order. The dog's gaze paused on Reed and held. There was a question there, Reed thought, or perhaps a memory surfacing. The dog's ears angled toward the door, toward the hill, and a low sound vibrated in its throat. Not fear, not aggression. Recognition. That moment, quiet and strange, was the re-hook that anchored itself in Reed's mind. The dog turned its head again toward the hill, toward the abandoned house, as if something there exerted gravity. Reed felt it too, the sense of unfinished business tugging at the edges of reason. He dismissed the thought as fatigue, as the echo of adrenaline. He focused on the practical. He examined the dog more thoroughly now that it was warm. The left front leg showed swelling consistent with an old fracture that had never healed right. The coat carried a faint odor that did not belong to forest or animal, oil, old and metallic. Reed frowned. He filed the detail away without conclusion. He cleaned his knuckle, wrapped it, and returned to the dog, who watched every movement with quiet intensity. The night passed in fragments. Reed slept on the floor beside the dog, waking every hour to check breathing and warmth. Each time the dog was there, alive, eyes opening and closing as if tethered to the sound of Reed's movements. Once, near dawn, the dog shifted closer on its own, a small migration measured in inches. Reed did not move away. Morning brought light that felt earned. The dog drank a little more water, accepted a few softened bites of food. Reed sat with his back against the stove, muscles aching, mind clear in the way it only became after a long night of doing exactly what needed doing. He named the dog then, not ceremonially, not aloud. Bishop, a piece on a board that had been abandoned but still mattered. By afternoon, the dog could lift its head without shaking. Reed opened the door briefly to let in fresh air and saw the hill again, the abandoned house standing as it always had. The dog's ears rose, and the low sound returned, stronger this time. Reed closed the door and rested his hand on the dog's shoulder until the tension eased. He did not yet know what the hill held. He did not yet know why the rope had been tied or who had tied it. He knew only that rescue, done right, was not heroism. It was patience. It was restraint. It was staying when leaving would be easier. And as he watched the dog breathe, steady now, Reed understood that whatever came next would not be a matter of choice so much as consequence. He cleaned the floor, reset the room, prepared what he could for the next hours. The dog slept. The cabin held them both. Outside, the hill waited. Reed carried the dog across the threshold with the careful deliberation of someone moving unexploded ordnance. He had opened the door with his shoulder, nudged it wider with his boot, and stepped inside without breaking rhythm, as if momentum itself were a form of protection. The cabin responded the way it always had, by offering heat and quiet without comment. The stove glowed low and steady. The air smelled of pine resin and iron. Reed lowered the dog onto the mat near the fire and knelt there for a moment, hands still beneath the chest and hips, feeling the weight settle, listening for the truth of the breath. He worked by habit rather than emotion. Water first, a few milliliters along the gums, waiting between each offering for the swallow. Then warmth, blankets layered but not smothering, the thermal draped so the face stayed clear. He spoke little because speaking took attention away from counting. Every breath mattered. Every pause meant something. The dog, an adult male German shepherd with a massive frame and a coat dulled by hunger, shivered and then steadied, the tremor receding in slow increments. One amber eye opened, then the other. They tracked Reed without panic, following his hands as if memorizing them. Reed cleaned his knuckle and wrapped it without ceremony. Blood had dried in a thin crescent along the bark scrape, the skin split, shallow but angry. He set a timer on his watch and returned to the mat. He slept on the floor beside the dog, waking every hour to count and check and adjust. The night passed in fragments stitched together by the steady labor of staying. Near dawn, as the stove ticked and the cabin exhaled warmth, Reed noticed something that did not belong. He leaned closer, fingers spreading the fur at the dog's shoulder, and caught the faintest metallic note. Oil, old and stubborn, not sap or soil. He inhaled again to be she. It was there, braided into the coat as if time itself had tried and failed to erase it. Reed frowned, not because he had an answer, but because he recognized a question when one insisted on being asked. The dog made it through the night. Morning light arrived, thin and honest, painting the room in pale bands. The dog accepted more water than a few softened bites of food. Its injured front leg remained useless, the paw hovering as if gravity had turned adversarial. Reed watched for signs of shock and saw none. He watched for fear and saw something else, attention. When Reed moved, the dog's ears followed. When Reed sat, the dog's gaze found his face and stayed there. He named the dog then, quietly, without announcing it to the room. Bishop, a piece that had been left in the wrong place but still mattered. He rested his hand on the dog's shoulder and felt the tension ease beneath his palm. The cabin held them both, and Reed recognized the sensation with a start. Not companionship, not yet, but occupation. The house was no longer empty in the way it had been before. It had learned a second breath. By late morning, Reed made the decision he had been circling since before dawn. He could keep Bishop warm and fed, but injuries like this demanded eyes trained to see what he could not. The nearest town sat an hour down the mountain, its clinic small and reliable. He prepared the truck with the same thoroughness he brought to everything: blankets secured, water packed, route considered. When he lifted Bishop again, the dog tensed and then yielded, trusting the pattern that had already proven itself. The clinic was quiet when they arrived. The woman who met them moved with brisk purpose, her posture straight, her expression attentive rather than alarmed. Dr. Lila Marrow was in her early 40s, of average height, with a wiry strength that came from lifting animals heavier than herself. Her hair, chestnut with a hint of gray at the temples, was pulled into a low bun. She wore a white coat over a gray turtleneck and dark jeans, boots scuffed from use. Her eyes were sharp and kind in equal measure, the kind of eyes that took in a scene and then decided how to help it. "Set him here," she said, already moving. Her voice was calm, practiced. She assessed Bishop with a glance that missed nothing: the pallor of the gums, the angle of the leg, the shallow scarring beneath the fur. She asked Reed questions without looking at him, and he answered the same way, precise, economical. When she finally met his eyes, she nodded once, approval, not praise. They worked in parallel. Lila palpated and listened, murmuring to Bishop in a low cadence that carried assurance without sentiment. She explained what she saw as she went: old fracture that had healed poorly, dehydration, exposure. Nothing she said was theatrical. All of it mattered. She noted the faint oil scent too, her brow creasing. "Not forest," she said, more to herself than to Reed. The rehook arrived while the IV dripped, and the room held its breath. Bishop, drowsy but aware, lifted his head and fixed his gaze on the window. Outside, beyond the lot and the line of trees, the mountain rose, pale against the sky. Bishop's ears angled forward. A low vibration threaded his throat, not pain, not fear. Recognition. Lila paused, hand still. Reed felt the same pull he had felt in the cabin, a tug that refused explanation. For a moment the clinic seemed smaller than it was, as if the hill had leaned closer to listen. Then Bishop settled, the sound fading, and the room exhaled. Lila taped the line and straightened. "You didn't imagine that," she said quietly. Reed did not ask how she knew. She handed him instructions, a schedule, a small bag of supplies. "Slow," she said, meeting his eyes again. "He's alive because you didn't rush. Keep not rushing." Back at the cabin, Reed followed the instructions like orders he believed in. Bishop slept, then woke, then slept again. The day slid toward evening. Reed cooked and ate standing, listening to the house accommodate a new rhythm: breath, pause, breath. He cleaned the floor, reset the room, prepared what he could for another night. At dusk, Bishop stirred and tried to rise. Reed moved to steady him, guiding the weight, preventing a fall. Bishop stood for a heartbeat, one, and then eased back down, frustrated but not panicked. Reed felt a flicker of something like pride and dismissed it. He was not here to feel good. He was here to do right. Night came on clean and cold. The stove ticked. The wind brushed the eaves. Reed slept in fragments again, waking to the sound of breath that now sounded like breath rather than negotiation. Once, in the small hours, Bishop shifted closer, closing the distance by inches, and rested his head where Reed's hand lay. Reed did not move away. By morning, the cabin no longer felt like a place Reed passed through. It felt inhabited. He did not name the change. He simply acknowledged it, the way one acknowledged weather. Outside, the hill waited. Reed knew they would go back, not yet, but soon. Whatever had tied the rope, whatever had left oil where oil did not belong, had not finished speaking. For now, the chapter closed with a quieter truth. The house that had learned a second breath held it through the night. Reed listened, counted, and stayed. The days that followed settled into a quieter, more demanding rhythm. Bishop recovered slowly, the kind of recovery that refused shortcuts. He did not run. He could not stand for long. When he tried to take more than a few steps, his body betrayed him, and he folded back to the floor with a frustrated huff, amber eyes flashing not with pain alone, but with disbelief, as if his muscles had broken a promise he had not agreed to. His coat began to regain a faint sheen, but the left front leg remained a reminder of time spent enduring rather than healing. Reed adjusted everything around that truth: food portions, walking distances, rest intervals, without commentary, without impatience. What did not change was Bishop's attention. No matter where Reed moved in the cabin, no matter how the light shifted or the stove ticked, Bishop's gaze returned again and again to the same place, the hill behind the house. He did not bark. He did not whine. He did not tug at the door. He simply watched, head angled slightly, ears lifting and lowering, as if listening to something Reed could not hear. The behavior unsettled Reed precisely because it lacked urgency. It felt deliberate, almost ceremonial, like a vigil kept for reasons not yet shared. Reed tried to ignore it at first. Animals remembered places the way people remembered scents, loosely, without narrative. He told himself Bishop's fixation was nothing more than habit, a residue of trauma. But each morning, when Reed opened the door to let in cold air and light, Bishop's posture changed. The dog's breathing slowed, his shoulders tensed, and his eyes locked onto the slope as if the hill itself were a held breath. Reed found himself standing beside the dog more often than he intended, both of them facing the same direction, neither speaking. On the fourth day, Reed made the decision without announcing it. He packed the truck lightly, helped Bishop up with practiced care, and drove toward the base of the hill. He told himself he was looking for context, not trouble. He had learned the cost of curiosity in other places. But this felt different. This felt like accounting. They moved slowly up the slope, Bishop limping but determined, Reed matching his pace. Snow muffled sound, and the air carried a clean, brittle cold. As they climbed, Reed noticed details he had missed before. Shallow grooves beneath the snow that did not match animal tracks, the faint chemical tang beneath pine and frost. The abandoned house grew larger, its windows still blind, its boards warped by seasons of neglect. Bishop stopped 10 yards short of the structure and lowered his head, a low rumble vibrating his chest. Not a growl, not a warning, but acknowledgement. Reed scanned the ground and found the first sign that turned unease into certainty. Old tire tracks intersecting with newer ones, pressed too deep to belong to light vehicles. He followed them with his eyes and found steel cable partially buried under a drift, its end frayed and darkened with sap. Nearby, several tree trunks bore cuts that were wrong, angled for speed rather than care, their stumps splintered rather than clean. This was not sanctioned logging. This was extraction done in haste. The rehook arrived when Bishop, without prompting, moved to a shallow depression near the house and pawed once at the snow. Reed crouched, brushed the surface aside, and uncovered a metal loop embedded in the ground, cold and deliberate. The loop matched the rope scars Reed had seen on Bishop's chest. For a moment the hill seemed to tilt, the pieces aligning into a shape Reed did not like. Bishop's memory was not abstract. It was anchored. They did not linger. Reed photographed what he could, careful to keep Bishop steady, and guided them back down before the light faded. The cabin welcomed them with heat and quiet. Bishop slept hard that night, exhausted by the climb, his head resting against Reed's boot as if proximity itself were medicine. Reed sat awake longer than usual, turning the images over in his mind, weighing what he had seen against what he knew of small towns and smaller truths. The next morning, Reed drove into town. He did not go to the sheriff first. He went to the ranger office, a low building with a green metal roof and a flag that snapped in the wind. Inside, he met Harper Sloan, a federal forest ranger in her mid-30s with dark hair cut to her shoulders and eyes the color of wet stone. She stood straight when she listened, hands folded on the counter, expression unreadable but attentive. Her jacket bore the marks of use, not decoration. When Reed laid out the photographs and spoke plainly about what he had found, she did not interrupt. Harper studied the images, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "We've had complaints," she said at last, her voice even. "Noise, missing markers, nothing that stuck." She looked up then, meeting Reed's eyes. "This helps." There was no promise in her tone, only process. Reed respected that. Back at the cabin, Bishop's recovery continued at its stubborn pace. He grew stronger by inches. He stood longer. He walked farther. But the hill never released its hold on him. Each evening, as the sun dipped and the slope turned blue with shadow, Bishop took his place by the door and watched. Reed watched with him, the silence between them no longer empty. By the end of the week, Reed understood something he had been resisting. Bishop was not merely healing, he was remembering. And memory, once stirred, demanded resolution. Reed did not know yet what form that resolution would take. He only knew that the hill was no longer a backdrop to his solitude. It was a ledger waiting to be balanced, and Bishop, forgotten, injured, persistent, was the one insisting the account be settled. The entrance was not where Reed expected it to be. It rarely was. Instead of hiding beneath the house or behind the thickest trees, the tunnel revealed itself along the fence line where the ground dipped just enough to break sight lines. Reed noticed it because Bishop stopped completely. One paw lifted, head angled, breath held. The dog's ears tilted forward, not in alarm, but in recognition, as if memory had finally found its coordinates. Reed followed the line of Bishop's gaze and saw the disturbed snow, the unnatural straightness of a shadow where shadows should not be straight. He crouched and brushed snow aside. The earth beneath was compacted, pressed by repeated boots and dragged weight. A metal lip emerged, then plywood, weathered and cut to fit. Reed did not open it yet. He photographed the perimeter first, the fence staples bent and rebent, the wire nicked where tools had slipped. He moved with the patience of someone who had learned the cost of assumption. When he finally lifted the panel, cold air spilled out carrying the stale breath of oil and damp paper. The tunnel was shallow but purposeful, leading to a dugout space just large enough to work. Inside, Reed found what Bishop had been trying to show him. Drums of fuel marked with hand-painted symbols, chainsaws stripped of serial numbers, coils of steel cable matching the loop he'd uncovered days earlier. There were documents, too, shipping manifests folded until the creases went soft, names abbreviated, destinations written in pencil and rubbed thin. This was not survival logging. This was laundering trees into money. Bishop stepped closer, nostrils flaring, and then did something Reed did not expect. He lowered himself and pressed his chest to the ground, chin resting between his paws, eyes fixed on the space. It was not fear. It was submission of a different kind, the posture of a witness. Reed's jaw tightened. The rope scars on Bishop's chest aligned with the cable on the floor. The conclusion settled with an awful clarity. Bishop had not been trapped by chance. He had been silenced because he was present, because he barked, because he would not leave. Reed reported everything. He sent photographs, coordinates, timestamps. He called the ranger office and the county line. The responses were polite and procedural. Resources were limited. A team would be scheduled. It was the delay he had anticipated, the kind that allowed truth to slip its leash. Reed thanked them and ended the calls without argument. Night came early. Snow began again, thin and steady, the kind that erased footprints while it fell. Reed did not go back to the cabin right away. He moved uphill instead, choosing angles and cover, placing small devices with the care of a man, setting reminders for himself. Motion sensors tucked low. Audio recorders hidden in snow-packed brush. A camera positioned to watch the tunnel mouth without seeing the house. He did not intend to confront anyone. Confrontation created variables. Evidence closed doors. The rehook arrived when Bishop, resting behind a fallen log, lifted his head and looked not toward the tunnel, but toward the tree line. Reed followed the line and saw headlights flicker once and die. Engines cut. Voices traveled faintly through the cold, confident and careless. Bishop's ears flattened. Reed felt the familiar narrowing in his chest. Not fear, not anger, but focus. He placed a hand on Bishop's shoulder. The dog stayed, muscles coiled but obedient, eyes bright with purpose. The men arrived the way men did when they believed no one was watching. There were 3 of them, one tall and thin, with a beard that hid a sharp jaw, his movements quick and nervous. Another broader, older, wearing a heavy coat stained with pitch, his gait easy with habit. The third moved less than the others, face obscured by a hood, hands sure on the equipment. Reed cataloged them without names. Names were for later. They worked fast, loading fuel, dragging cable, erasing the day's carelessness. One of them kicked at the snow near the fence and laughed. The sound carried. Bishop's lip lifted a fraction, a flash of white, then settled again. Reed's recorder caught everything. The scrape of metal, the muttered curses, the shorthand of men who had done this before. When one of them tugged at the steel loop embedded in the ground, cursing its stubbornness, Reed felt a pulse of cold satisfaction. The loop held. He did not intervene when they noticed the camera. He had placed it where it would be seen, a temptation wrapped in curiosity. The tall man swore and reached for it, lifting it into the light. "You see that?" he said, uncertainty creeping in. The older man's laugh died. The third man went still. Reed let the moment stretch, letting doubt do its work. They made mistakes after that. They argued. They touched things they should not have touched. They spoke names and routes and dates. Reed's devices drank it all. When the men finally left, taking less than they intended, Reed waited until the hill breathed again. Then he collected what he had placed, leaving the ground as he had found it. Back at the cabin, Bishop paced once and then lay down, exhaustion replacing vigilance. Reed uploaded files, backed them up, wrote a brief summary without adjectives. He sent it to the ranger office and copied the state line. He did not add commentary. Evidence did not need embellishment. Dawn broke clean. The calls came before breakfast. Harper Sloane's voice was steady, but different this time. Tighter, edged with motion. "We're mobilizing," she said. "Stay clear." Reed agreed. He always did. By afternoon, vehicles marked and unmarked moved along the lower road. Reed watched from the porch, Bishop beside him, weight leaning subtly into Reed's leg. There were no sirens. There were no raised voices. Men were led away with their hands free and their faces pale. The hill did not cheer. It simply settled. That evening, Reed walked Bishop to the fence line. The dog sniffed the air, then turned away from the tunnel and faced the open slope. His posture changed, shoulders looser, tail at ease. Reed felt the quiet certainty that some truths did not require force to be spoken. They required patience, attention, and the refusal to look away. The chapter closed without gunfire, without glory. It closed with a ledger balanced and a witness released. Reed turned back toward the cabin, Bishop at his side, the night accepting them both. The work finished itself quietly, the way the best work always did. There were no press trucks on the road, no shouting voices, no photographs staged for proof. The hill changed first, almost imperceptibly. Stakes appeared along the lower boundary, clean and official, their orange caps catching the light. Fresh signage followed, plain and factual, announcing protection rather than victory. The abandoned house lost its secrecy. Doors were sealed, boards numbered, evidence tagged and removed with care. What had once been a shadow became a place with a file, a date, a conclusion. Reed watched from the porch as the last unmarked vehicle rolled away. Bishop lay at his feet, chin resting on the wood, breathing slow and even. The dog's coat had filled in, the black and tan catching the sun, the old scars softened by time. The left front leg still carried its history, but it bore weight now, steady enough to trust. Reed felt the quiet satisfaction of things done correctly. Not perfectly, but honestly. The confirmation arrived 2 days later in the form of a woman Reed had never met. She came alone, walking up the drive with measured steps, pausing once to take in the cabin and the slope behind it. Her name was Elena Cross. She was in her early 30s, tall and lean, her dark hair braided down her back, her face composed in a way that suggested she had practiced steadiness for years. Her eyes were brown and direct, the kind that met grief without flinching. She wore a ranger's jacket that had seen seasons, the fabric faded at the elbows, boots worn to the shape of her feet. They sat at the small table inside, steam rising from mugs neither of them touched. Elena spoke without ornament. The missing ranger had been her brother. His name was Matthew Cross. He had been meticulous, stubborn in the way that came from believing rules existed to protect more than paper. When he failed to return, the search widened, and then narrowed, and then stalled. The official language shifted from active to archived. Elena had kept looking. Bishop lifted his head at the sound of the name, not sharply, not with alarm. Recognition again, like a bell rung softly. Elena's gaze followed the movement, and something in her expression loosened. She reached out, palm down, allowing the dog to choose. Bishop rose and crossed the room, placing his head beneath her hand with a deliberation that felt ceremonial. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, breath catching and then settling. "He used to say the dog knew the woods better than he did," she said, her voice steadying itself. "Said he trusted him when maps lied." She looked at Reed, then really looked, taking in the quiet order of the place and the man who had kept it. "Thank you," she said, as if thanks could hold everything else she felt. Reed nodded once. He did not tell her what it had cost. He did not need to. The rehook came not as revelation, but as choice. Elena explained the next steps, the formal identification, the transfer of records, the offers that would follow. There would be questions. There would be requests. Reed listened and felt the old instinct rise. Withdraw, reduce exposure, return to the perimeter. Bishop shifted beside him, pressing his weight into Reed's leg, not anxious, simply present. Reed felt the tug of two futures, equally plausible. He chose without ceremony. "Bishop stays," he said. Elena nodded, relief flickering across her features. Some truths did not need debate. Spring edged in by degrees. Snow retreated from the porch boards. The hill softened, green threading through brown. Reed adjusted to a new routine that did not feel like interruption. Morning walks became shared negotiations, pace measured to Bishop's leg, distance expanded by confidence rather than demand. The cabin accepted the change without complaint. Tools moved to make room for bowls. Silence learned how to accommodate sound. Harper Sloane stopped by once, paperwork in hand, posture relaxed in a way Reed had not seen before. The case had closed cleanly. The forest would take time to recover, but it would recover. Harper crouched to greet Bishop, who accepted the attention with dignity. "He did good," she said. Reed agreed. There were no medals. There was no ceremony. There was only continuity, the slow accumulation of days that did not ask to be survived. Reed found himself sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching light move across the slope, Bishop at his side. The dog's attention no longer fixed on the hill. It ranged now, curious rather than vigilant, as if permission had been granted to rest. One afternoon, Elena returned to say goodbye. She stood at the fence line, the hill behind her quieter than Reed had ever seen it. "Matthew would have liked this," she said. Reed understood what she meant. Liking was not approval, it was alignment. The final scene arrived without announcement. Reed sat on the porch, the sun warm enough to coax meltwater into small, patient streams. Bishop lay against his boot, head heavy with contentment. There was no music, no speech. The truth did not require either. Reed had lived alone until the day he chose to carry another life across his threshold. From that moment, solitude ceased to be a principle and became a chapter already finished. He stayed where he was, listening to 2 breaths instead of 1, and let the past take its proper place behind him. Sometimes the miracle is not a storm that stops or a wound that vanishes overnight. Sometimes the miracle is quieter, a single step taken back toward the light when a person thought the heart had already learned to live in the dark. Reed did not find Bishop by accident, not really. On that northern hill, it felt as if God placed one fragile life in the path of another, the way heaven sometimes answers prayers we never speak out loud. A man who had trained himself to survive alone was given a reason to stay human. A dog who had been silenced became the witness that helped truth come into the open. And that is how grace often moves in daily life, not as thunder, but as a small nudge, the urge to turn around, to check one more time, to help when it would be easier to walk away. Maybe it is a neighbor who needs a ride, a lonely elder who needs a call, an animal that needs kindness, or simply a weary soul who needs someone to say, "I see you." If you have ever felt forgotten, let this story remind you that God sees what the world overlooks, and He can turn what was meant for harm into a doorway back to hope. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs a second chance today. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what small miracle you have witnessed in your own life. And if you want more stories of love, courage, and redemption, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. May God bless you and your family, give you strength for your battles, peace for your nights, and a gentle light to guide you home.